Welcome back to My Life, His Story. If you remember last week, we started the story of Heather Flint, and where we left off, she was exiting uh, the rehabilitation facility. And and Heather, I just want to ask you, can we go back there? Like, take me back to when you walked out of rehab for the first time. Take me back to walking out of that doors and just where you were, what was going on, what you were feeling. I just think it's great to start there.
Yeah, so when I walked out, I was in such a good place for the first time in a very long time. I was completely free of any alcohol, mind altering anything, and I had been plugged in, obviously, because they make you to just to meetings all the time and just encouragement. And it was so hard, but it was so good. And I walked out just feeling just on cloud nine. I just felt so good. And I remember thinking, now what? And so I went back to my job at the bar briefly. Um, it felt so foreign and so awkward. And I remember walking out mid shift. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And I felt this rejection and like I didn't belong anymore. Not that that's a new feeling, but um, and so then I was just like lost. Like, what am I supposed to do? I have, a place to live. I don't belong. Like, I can't pay my bills out anyway. So I ended up moving back in with my mom. I was older, moved back in. And during going to meetings and all of those things, I had met a lady that worked at FedEx. And so I ended up getting a job there briefly. Well, not briefly, but I worked there for a little bit. And through some meetings, I met some people that worked at the local hospital. And so I ended up getting a job there and an entry level job, which was like a nurse assistant. And so I did that and I loved it because I got to help people and it was like legit helping people. And I was going to meetings and I was sober and I was like, finally felt like my life had some purpose. And I was just, life was good, right? I mean, it wasn't great because I was older and I was living with my mom, but it was good. And so
Sure.
I was I was working and I was on the floor and I was doing really good. And I had a head phlebotomist recruit me off the floor to be a phlebotomist. And so I took that job and I loved it because it was a skill. I got really good at it. And I always like to just be the best I can. Again, that goes from the whole like as a child having to be a perfectionist. And so I mean you can see the pattern here, right? And so
Yeah.
I got really good at that. And in all of that, you're all over the hospital, but you spend a lot of time in the ER. And so that was like the moment that I ended up I spent a lot of time in the ER and I absolutely loved it. It was like chaos, but I fit and I didn't feel the chaos I was seeing. It just felt like home. It felt normal. And so I saw like the ambulance and all the people and coming in and I'm like, what is that? Like I want some of that, right? And so I started asking a lot of questions and I ended up going to and applying to go to EMT school. And I was like, yes, I finally get to put all of that chaos training from
Yeah.
childhood to good use, right? To do good. And so I'm sitting in class and I'm excited. I'm a little student, and we're going through like the first part of the class and we're in the whole like, what does it take to be an EMT? And they're going all through through the record stuff and all of that, and um, we hit this section about your background and it says like if you have any legal background, you can't be an EMT. And my heart sank. Like I literally sank in my chair. And I mean, I just felt like the wind had gotten knocked out of me. And
Yeah.
I just because of
Sorry, because of
yeah,
the situation that
because
you
of
talked about in part
ago.
one.
5 years
Yeah.
ago, yeah, I had that drunk driving that I had. And so I was like, great, you know what? Now what? And I thought like, man, I'm on the right track. I'm building this relationship with God, whatever that meant. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew that
Sure.
I was doing the things that I thought I was supposed to be doing, right? And so I felt depleted. Well, my professor at the time was a paramedic instructor. Obviously, he was also he worked he was an attorney, judge, referee. And so I'm like, well, he'll know. So I stayed after class, and I just asked, and I'm like, I just need to tell you something. So 5 years ago, I got in some trouble. I explained the whole thing to him, was completely honest. And he's like, wow, that's what, nobody's ever just been this honest in the beginning. Let me do some research and just make sure. I think you're good, but let me just check. So I went and checked. Um, believe it or not, the time was 5 years. So I was like, to the day. Sorry.
Wow.
I still can't believe it because it was like such a God thing.
Yeah. So you have
Five
this,
years.
and what's interesting, not to backtrack too far, but
Mhm.
so you have this moment, you talked about at the end of episode one where you're on your knees and you're crying out for help, and all that leads you to this rehab, which then leads you, to this community of people who are willing to encourage you and fight with you and stand with you, which leads you to this hospital where you find this passion, right? And I mean, we could get into the fact that, your protector uh, uh,
Just so,
trait
yeah.
that was started at a young age is what led you to the medical field, wanting to help and protect and be there. Um, and that leads you to EMT. You're sitting in class. First off, sitting in class had to feel like Billy Madison, right? Because at
Right?
this point, you're a little bit older than everybody else. I've been there. I went to college right after I got out of the army. So I was like 30 years old, sitting in class, looking around like, golly, I don't fit in.
I wasn't
But
that
then,
much older, Brian. This was
oh,
over 20 years ago. Come on.
okay.
I'm
Well,
not
then
60.
I guess I'm dating myself. But so then you
No,
have this
no, Billy Madison, yes, but this was 20
yeah,
years ago. Like,
gotcha. So then you have this moment where this professor is like, oh, by the way, if you've been in legal trouble, you're out. And then once again, it seems like, this reoccurring theme. It's like God is just standing there with you and is like, I told you I got you.
that's right.
Right. And so you end up finishing school, you graduate, you become an EMT. Tell me about that. Like,
So
tell me about operating as an EMT.
oh my goodness, it was like the best thing ever. I loved it so much, and I thrived, and I just loved it. And of course, overachiever. All the required hours, all the required skills, all of those, I went above and beyond and did like two or three times as much as we needed. And so I was making a reputation for myself in the community. And so when the time came and I had the required years in the field to be able to apply for paramedic school, I did that. And went further because I absolutely loved it. It was like my calling. And the reason is because I was able to function in chaos, right? It's what I was made for. I mean, from the time I was in the womb, I was prepared for this moment to be in chaos and to be able to remain calm in the storm, right? And there were so
Sure.
many times in different scenarios and situations and mass casualties and things like that where everybody around me was just it was chaos, and I was able to focus and hone in and get to the victim and do what I needed to do to pull them out and to get them help and help them and do what needed to be done. And even as a student, as a paramedic student, we went to a mass casualty event, and I was a student, and it was departments from the different departments that responded. Anyway, it was a major scene, and my it's the same instructor. I was his partner at the time because he ended up, I was his partner because we were on different departments, and anyway, became great friends after that and worked together. And we had a pediatric patient that was not in good shape, and I'm in the back of the rig with this ped by myself while they're trying to figure everything out. And I remember just looking up to God and praying, like, is this really what I'm supposed to do? Because here I am with this child and just praying, like, please just help me, through this. And I remained calm. We got her to the hospital because of the situation. We ended up continuing to care for her in the hospital with the doc because of the situation. And I just remember throughout my whole career, like God was with me through the storm, through the chaos, like he was with me and remained with me. And that's just a reminder that no matter what we go through, no matter where we find ourselves, he is with us. He's faithful. He tells us that. And we don't have to go through it alone. And from the time I was conceived, it was preparation for all the things that I would go through up to and continuing through my life.
Sure. Wow. Wow. So so you're operating, I would say, like, that old uh, firing on all cylinders, right? And life is going relatively well, but another curveball happened, right? So life is going well, things are things are improving, your relationship is growing with God, you're operating in what you feel is your purpose, and then you met this cop, right?
Former. So I need to make sure, and because
Sure.
when we met, he was not in the field. That was past. So yeah, so I met my husband, John. So when we met, he was working in a totally different field, but he was prior law enforcement search and rescue. And that is one of the things that um, kind of attracted him to me, I guess, because understanding my job and what I did and things. And yeah, so we met, and it's so funny because just the way we met and our first interaction, it was so funny. So, um, because of how I am, I didn't date people. I didn't want to date, I was so focused on my job. I worked 24 and 48-hour shifts, and, didn't date people, that I worked with. And so I met him online, and I didn't it was obviously scary, in the field and stuff. And so I invited him to a fish fry the day after my birthday one year. Because I knew I'm surrounded by my brothers, so I'm safe, right? So he comes all the way out to where I was at, and we met and we started dating. And there was a lot of stuff with all that. He was going through stuff in his personal life. He had gone through a divorce, and there was just a lot of stuff there. But yeah, so we went through all of that. Come to find out, he was also pursuing and ended up becoming a bivocational pastor. So take that. I mean, my path of life, and then that's where I ended up. I'm married to. So yeah.
Wow. And so you meet your husband, you guys end up getting married. He's a bivocational pastor, you're an EMT, you guys are killing it. Um, I think if we were to stop the story here, most people would be like, wow, that's a really cool story of, struggle and obstacles at a young age, and then God kind of coming in. But
But
more, yeah, more true to actual life, right? If this was a movie, this is where it would end, and people would be like, "Oh, she lived happily ever after." But in reality, I mean, you had another really big moment happen um,
I did.
that kind of changed everything again, right?
Yeah, completely. So in 2015, uh, I was in a car accident and suffered a traumatic brain injury, and it changed everything. And to the point that now Little Miss Independent became completely dependent. Um, I don't have a lot of memory of all the different things that I went through, but John does. And it was not a good thing. He talked to all the different docs and all that, and the things that they told him, it was just not a good thing. And he was, because of his faith and everything, I mean, just prayed over me and for me so much. But I can tell you this, it was a very, very dark place. I cried out to God. I just wanted to. Why am I here? I can't fulfill what I thought was my purpose. To go out and save the world. Right. I wanted to go to medical school now because I'd done the EMS thing, and now I want to be a flight doc and continue to save the world. And I thought that was what my purpose was, and I didn't have time to be a pastor's wife. I had bigger and better things, right? Because I still was struggling with the whole, I'm independent. I'm going to do these things, and it's like it took my independence away, and I had to relearn how to walk and do all these different things. It was insane the things I went through, and I would lay there and I would have all these just flashbacks and hallucinations of smells and calls and all kinds of things. It was the darkest place I've ever been. And I would pray and just beg God, like, why am I here? Why wouldn't you just like take me in the accident? Why am I still here? Why am I going through this? I would sit there and try to come up with ways that I could end my life that um, wouldn't impact another responder, because I didn't want a responder to find me and go through all the things I'm going through right now with the hallucinations and the thoughts and the visions and all those things. But obviously, he's not going to, right? It didn't happen.
Right.
Um, but it was very, very dark. And the whole time, John tells me this now. He wouldn't tell me then, obviously, and I wouldn't have comprehended it anyway. But he said there was a time period there that he was literally preparing himself every single day for coming home and finding me. He just thought that it would get to the point that he would come home and find me dead, because of just the way that things were going.
And I think that's, you know, you and I over the years have become very good friends, and part of it is the struggle, right? We both have had our own fare of uh, punches to the face, if you will, and yeah, I mean, it's always it's always so amazing to me that here things are going well, life is going well, and then at a sudden instant, just everything changes, and you're in this dark place, and like I understand it, right? Because at the same time, a lot of your identity had been in this. I'm a healer. I'm a protector. I'm a server, and now you're the servant. Nope. Now you're the served. There we go. Right now, like I can understand going from independent to dependent, and that feeling of being a burden to those around you. And I think there's a lot of people listening that will also understand what that's like. And so, I mean, I have to ask, like, because I know you now, like, I'm just going to ask, what happened? Like, from that dark place where death looked like an upgrade,
Yeah.
what happened?
Yeah. So there were a couple of absolutely monumental events that happened. Yeah, my identity was in the uniform. It just was. That's who I was. It was in the title. It was in all of those things. And when that got taken away, it's like I'm nothing now, because for so long I had no anything. I mean, I had no value. Nothing was ever good enough, especially with my family, or my dad. I mean, I was never good enough, no matter what. And so now that that's gone, now I'm nobody. And so I just wanted to die. And so one of the main things that happened is, my mom had called. She was out in Nevada, and Don had he just didn't know what to do anymore. And I get it, it was a lot. And so we ended up moving out here to Nevada, to be closer to family, and for him, truthfully, just to get some help. And we got out here, and I mean, we had been in just praying and praying, and he had been praying for me, and didn't know what to do. We got out to here, and I was still struggling a lot, but just continuing to remain faithful in prayer. And little by little, I was getting a little better and a little better. Um, I had continued to search for, I'd gone through all the different therapies, all the things, speech therapy, occupational therapy, psych therapy, neurotherapy, all of the things, but I just wasn't there. Um, I was one night I was on Facebook, I think it was, and I came across this ad for Reboot Recovery First Responders, and I'm like, what's that? And I opened it up, and it said it was Christian faith based, and I was like, oh, that kind of resonates a lot. And so I reached out to headquarters, and I spoke with a guy named Adam, who's no longer with Reboot, and was like, what is this? He explained it and sent me a sample. It was called Actually, it was First Line. It wasn't Reboot. It was called First Line back then. And I said, I want to join. And he's like, well, sorry, there's not, this was before virtual. And he said, there's not any courses in your area, but you can start one. And I was like, yeah, right. Like, that ain't happening right now. And so we literally, John and I spent a year solid in prayer about it. The Lord continued to work, on my heart, and open me up. I can't even tell you the work that he did on our relationship, digging in the Bible. He and I we spent so much time together just digging into God's word and studying and digging. And that was what changed so many things, with me, and in prayer. And in that whole year of praying and just digging into the word together as a couple, um, and we ended up, I don't remember how I ended up getting back in. I do remember something happened, and I'm not going to go into detail about it for confidentiality purposes. But there was an event that happened on a specific day, and I reached back out to Reboot and I said, I'm ready to make this happen. And they said, well, good news. We have a virtual course that's going to happen now. And so you can kind of jump on and co lead, if you will. And it's with one of our staff members who is Bryan. And so that's how you and I met.
Yeah. And, it was interesting, Heather, the first time we met, because we met on a Zoom before the group started, just to talk and say hi. And, um, the Heather that sat on the computer screen then isn't the same Heather that sits on the screen now. And, um, walking through that group with you and watching just how some of that trauma and some of those hard things in your life, how instead of running and numbing, to watch you and John specifically stand there and fight it and know that you had a group of people to fight it with. Um, that's just something that I'll never forget my whole life. And what's crazy is, so you go through the group, you start your group, and I mean, now there are hundreds of people in your area that you've led through Reboot now. Many of them have gone on to start their own reboots, and really this movement in your area started by your obedience. And of course, uh, shortly after all of this happened, I got called away from Reboot, and I made a phone call to you that was kind of unexpected, but I do want to talk about it because I think it's like the final point in your story where, for today's purposes anyway, where God was just like, trust me.
Yep.
And so tell me about that phone call. Tell me about the call that I had with you.
Yeah. So that was another thing. So I had pretty much accepted, and John had to, and through prayer and beginning. So John's level of trust and faith, it was, I mean, obviously being a pastor and where he was at, he trusted through it all, right? And trusted through my healing and through all of that. And when I, knowing that I was not going to be able to bring any, you know I couldn't contribute to the family. That was a whole nother part of my whatever. But they told me I'd never work again, right? They said that's it. And so that was a whole nother level. And so I just pretty much accepted and talked to him, and I was just going to serve and volunteer and serve the Lord. Like, I was okay with that. Now, when we got out here and things had happened in my life and my relationship grew with God the way it had, I was okay with that. And so serving and doing all those reboots that you're talking about and all of those things, like, I was good with that. And I was excited. And you called me one day and you're like, hey, I got some good news and I got some bad news. And don't be upset. I'm like, well, you can't tell me that. I'm not going to promise you that because I don't make promises I don't keep. So you're not going to say, don't be mad, because I'm not going to promise that. And you're like, just listen to me. Just hear, though. God called me away from Reboot, and I'll never forget it. But you said, how do you feel about working for Reboot? And I was just like blown away because, again, all the doctors, all the professionals said that I wouldn't, because I mean, I had to relearn how to like do ABC 1, 2, 3. So the thought of working was like out of, and all of my schooling, all of my everything for the last 20 plus years was on medical stuff. And that's my background. That's all I know. So seriously. And you were like, no, just trust me. And so,
Well,
yeah.
actually, your initial response was not a chance. That was your first response. And I'll never forget is, as I was transitioning from Reboot, I was asked, like, who do you think could take your role? And as soon as I was asked, I prayed about it and I just knew it was you. Uh, and I knew it had to be you. And so uh, I won't forget, after that first conversation, I waited a little bit of time. It was like an hour. And I called you back and I said something that I don't say often. And I said, Heather, I need you to trust me. It's supposed to be you. And what's crazy now is of course, I came back to Reboot. I know, big spoiler alert for everyone, but you know, in my absence, God proved that it was you, and He proved that your purpose, that you had identified with the chaos and you had identified with all this other stuff, that you did have a greater purpose, that you had His purpose, right? And really, in theme of this podcast, God showed you that your life was His story, that He was going to use everything you've been through, every pain you've been through. He was going to use it to help other people go from where you once were to where you are now. And I just think it's awesome. And, now we've been coworkers for over a year, and um, working alongside each other to help people know that there is a way to overcome trauma, that, you don't have to be defined by your past and your mistakes. And let me ask you this, Heather, kind of in closing, let me ask you this. If there was one sentence or one or two sentences, if there was one thing, we'll go with that. If there was one thing that you could tell the listeners of this podcast, what do you want? One message to them, what do you want it to be?
That you're not alone, that there are so many people out there that are going through things too, and that God is with you, and that He will not leave you, and that there's purpose in pain. There truly, truly is. And there's a lot of people that can attest to that.
Wow, Heather, thank you so much for your vulnerability in opening up and letting us see a look into your story and your life.
Ooh.
I can't I can't thank you enough for it. And thank you for listening to My Life, His Story. Again, this is just the beginning. We're going to continue to talk with everyday people and find out how God has impacted their life as well. So join us next week on My Life, His Story.